Works.
Okay.
Before we get started with Chris, I just wanted to give everybody two quick updates. The first, you should have gotten a forward from me that this group was invited to the JCUAB housing group meeting. So that'll be a virtual meeting. I believe it's Thursday, August 5th at 9 a.m. If any of y'all can make it, please do. They're going to be talking about some subjects that overlap with what we're working on, and we want to try to find a way to work with them going forward. And then the second thing is, if you can make it out tomorrow, ClemsonNext is having its series of community meetings tomorrow. Rain or shine, we will be there. So if you can make it to one of those, please do that as well. And that's it. So we can turn it over to Christine whenever you're ready, Catherine.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, we're good. For those of you who do not know, let me introduce Chris. I do not know how many years you've been in Clemson, but it's a few. And I'm some. Oh, here we go. Hang on. Let me let everybody in. Oh, Bill, I thought you were here. Okay, sorry. Chris is an architect, professor of architecture, and one of the things we've been talking about in housing is this outside the box concept. And I think we're getting away from the box, and I'm excited about that on a lot of levels. And so that's what we want to do, is really talk about some different things and really how we can create something new and exciting. And I think that many of us are ready for that, to see what's possible. So Chris is incredible. If you've seen any of her work, if you've seen her work, then I'm going to turn this over to her and let her talk to us about how we can be educated on affordable housing. All yours.
Okay, great. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Shannon, for asking me to come today. I'm actually not a professor of architecture. I've had a practice of architecture for, gosh, since 22 years now, and I'm kind of winding it down. But my husband is a professor of architecture, and that might be what you're thinking about. But I've lived in Clemson for about 4 years now, and prior to that, lived in Pendleton for almost 25. So been in the area for a long, long time. The bulk of my practice has been commercial and institutional work, with some church work as well. Done very little housing, actually, but I'm always fascinated by housing. And a couple of years ago, I came across a book called Pocket Neighborhoods. Can everybody see the screen?
No, we can't see anything, Chris.
Okay. How do I share? Because I have several images I want to share with you.
There should be a little green button at the bottom that says share
Okay.
screen.
Okay, there we go. Oh. All right, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. This book is written by an architect who was trying to start just small houses for communities in his area. He lives in Washington State. His name is Ross Chapman, and he caught my eye because these were really interesting, very simple concepts using small houses, very little land. Parking was put to the perimeter, and these were created a common green. So what I want to do is talk about today what pocket neighborhoods are. I want to show examples from this book. I'm going to show a few examples that I have done in my own practice. These are unbuilt projects, but they are larger in scale. And then my ideas and thoughts about Clemson. So with that note, I'm going to try to go back and share my screen again. Let's see. Can you see that image? Or is it still the book? Okay, you should see a person pulling a wagon of groceries. Is that what everybody sees?
Yes.
Okay, good. This is kind of a typical green. You're seeing the edge of it where the more public rooms and porches of a house face a common green. And these kind of neighborhoods were done. There were actually a lot of them done on the West Coast historically. And you might have seen some of these and not really realized what they were, but typically they would have small 1 and 2 bedroom bungalows on a city block with an interior garden and then private gardens behind. These are garages on the corner, each corner, and then you'd have street parking around. So again, what the intent of the design was to kind of cluster small houses, create community with this common green so people could watch their children, become friends, and it became just kind of a nice little tight community. The recommendation of what typically was done, it's really about 12 to 16 houses. So it's not a whole lot of houses, but enough to form a community. They were typically tucked off busy streets, and they're called pocket neighborhoods. So again, if you're wondering what is a pocket neighborhood, it's just a cluster or group of houses gathered around a shared common garden or green, provides a setting for neighbors to get to know each other and form a community and around a common space. And there's a collective sense of ownership as well, and of belonging. Here's a more recent pocket park, and you see these appear to be slightly larger houses. Here's a common green in the middle. We've got parking garages off, single parking garages off to the lower right-hand corner, and then a street with street parking, and then another smaller community right up here, and there's their common green. And you see a lot of sidewalks connecting the two, but again, it's about, you know, front yards, front doors, kind of facing each other. And typically, if this is the common green here, you'll have a low fence with, you know, perennial border so people can garden. You've got a front porch, living room, kitchen, dining room. So all those rooms are on the public green with bedrooms, bathrooms, utilities towards the back. Some of these are 1-story houses, some are 2-story. Average size is between 700 and 2,400 square feet. So again, not real large, but you can get a sense from that square footage that you can have some neighborhoods that actually have larger houses. This is a built community it's called Conover Commons, and it's in Redmond, Washington. And you see that these houses are probably 2,500 square feet each or so. They have a second floor. This was a difficult site because they could not get parking on here. And the architect said, hey, that's a plus. We can cluster the parking over here, because so often too many cars, or, you know, a typical suburban residential area without sidewalks is just taken over by cars, and you don't have that nice pedestrian feel or garden type community feeling. Also, typically what they'll do is they'll have a common building like this, which can be many different things. It can be their community meeting room. They might host potlucks. It can also have a guest bedroom in there for guests, overflow at the holidays or whatever. But this becomes a building for everyone to use. So any questions on that so far? All right, what I'm going to show you next is, this is a project, it's an unbuilt project that I did a few years ago, and it involved several stages of housing. And I'm showing you this because I really want you to start thinking about how many different groups of people can actually use this kind of housing. And this was an independent and assisted living center with independent apartments, an Alzheimer's wing. And then these were smaller houses that people could buy, and they could gradually graduate into higher levels of care as they aged. So again, we created a common spine, which is our common green, with sidewalks leading up to the cafeteria over here that they could share. Parking is on the perimeter edge. And this is certainly beyond 12 to 16 units, but it kind of gives you the idea of, okay, this can be done this way too. And then again, these are not big houses at all. This is the common green on the south side of the screen. And parking again is in the rear. This is a typical floor plan. This floor plan is a single story, 1,500 square feet. There's a single car garage, covered walkway into the kitchen with a big living dining combination, and then a back hallway, 2 bedrooms, 2 baths. So with that, go back here a minute. My thoughts for Clemson, I know in talking to Andy Blondeau, he had mentioned that the town has some acreage that they've gotten. I'm not sure how they obtained it. It might be through tax defaults or whatever. But one of the things that we've done with other communities is look at. Let me find this project. Hold on a second here. Well, let me go back one second. This is the project I just showed you called Conover Commons in Redmond, Washington. And you can see how the cluster of housing is pretty tight. And just below it is your typical suburban neighborhood with a long street and a cul-de-sac and big driveways. It's called Welcome to My Garage. There's no common green. It uses more land. It's just a nice comparison to look at this and then this. And this actually extends over into here too, and this road goes back. So there's street parking. Okay, so I think that's another good example. And then, let's see. If we go back here for a minute. In thinking about Clemson and how this applies to Clemson, what I think is interesting is that we have no homeless shelter, for example, in this community. We also lack affordable housing. And I know I did a homeless shelter over in Seneca several years ago. And at that time, when Greenville was full and it was very cold, they were literally busing people as far away as Spartanburg at nighttime. And in thinking about a community like this, you could actually create, as an example, just a conceptual example, you could create this as a homeless shelter. It would be obviously a larger building with smaller kind of stepstone housing where people could graduate out of a shelter, move into a house that's less than 1,000 square feet until they get a job, they get on their feet financially, and then they graduate to another higher level of housing. That's one example. Another example is for young families, looking for affordable housing in Clemson. Again, 1,500 square feet or so, 2 to 3 bedroom. You would still have a community building. Another example would be elderly housing, say for widowed single people. Again, you could certainly have a house that's maybe 750 to 1,000 square feet. But if all these people were single and widowers, they'd have a wonderful community here. So those are the kinds of things that I think about this kind of concept or idea for housing. It's really quite wonderful and adaptable for many different uses and different user groups that we have in our community that could possibly fit very well in something like this. So that's kind of it. That's just a real short presentation on what something like this can be. So one other thing I do want to show you, there's another project that I've done that we've looked at land, and I've got to find my example. I've got so many things open here. I'm not sure where it went. Anyway, I can tell you about it. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's an old It's a 30 or 40-year-old golf community called Chickasaw Point on Lake Hartwell. And they contacted us about 4 or 5 years ago to look at their community. They were suffering because they didn't have new younger people coming in. They didn't have any new housing. And they were having trouble paying their dues, getting people to pay their dues. And they were trying to maintain their golf course themselves. And they have an 18-hole golf course. And to maintain it, just the maintenance at that time was about $1 million a year. And so it was quite a burden on them. And they really needed some younger families to move in and invest in the community. So this is a 1,300-acre site. And we went in and looked at vacant lots that the community owned. We looked at, we were generally looking for low slope, 2 to 3%, so there wouldn't be a whole lot of grading. And we identified several sites where they could go in and put some of these pocket park type neighborhoods, because they actually have a lot of people coming up from Atlanta buying second homes. And so they were real excited about this. And they were, this place was very, very hilly, had a lot of ravines. And one thing that's interesting about this particular community is if you see this on the lower right side, that little platform is a viewing platform that looks down into a ravine. So they made kind of a detrimental thing on this site a positive. And that's what we were trying to do with Chickasaw Point too, is kind of create these, these more desirable areas for younger families to come in and move here, invest in the community, create biking and hiking trails out of this very hilly site that was really not good for building houses, but great for cycling and trails and things like that. And so, I think that, again, this can apply to many different types of situations and different types of communities, different population groups, different ages and stages of life. So anyway, that's my little short presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
Chris, I love this, and Shannon knows that I love the book. I appreciate all of it. I was surprised to learn, I met with Neil Workman, I guess now a couple of weeks ago, and I went out. There's actually, if you guys want to see it, slightly different take too, out at the pier, which is south of Clemson between us and Townville. They have what they're calling little pocket neighborhoods. Now, I looked at them and I think they're smaller, they're really more tiny homes.
Right.
But yeah, they're tiny, and they're like the 550 to 650 square foot range, which, I mean, I'm all for small, but that's way small. But anyway, the point is that we are not alone in this concept. And there was some really interesting ideas from the group out there. Well, I was talking to Neil with Trail about how to think about this. But how do you feel about this? I know at Chickasaw Point, because that's more seniors as well. So I guess as long as it's more one-story living, that could be more senior oriented.
Yeah, and exactly. And let me talk about the pier a minute, where the student housing it's a similar concept, but it's different in that those houses are 350 square feet, and they are tiny, and they are for students. And so it's a very transient population. And I doubt that the sense of community ever develops there with people living there 4 months and then leaving. And maybe they live there a year and then they leave. But it's a very different type of housing. But it does work for students who want to live alone. Now, for Chickasaw Point, again, they were trying to appeal to younger families as well as older people. So the one-story plan is desirable. Of course, if you have a second story or a partial second story, you increase your square footage, and that can be a plus as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I didn't mean that anyone was particularly better. I was surprised at the pier that it existed. And then I went out there and I went, oh, wait, these are like
They're really
These are-
tiny houses.
Yeah, and they're not really what we were talking about, but I was still surprised to even see that there was that concept out there. I didn't know.
Yeah.
The last time I was out at the pier was probably 4 years ago. So, and yeah, the ones like at Chickasaw Point, and they're right, their golf courses are interesting examples. You know, some of them are bigger than others. My mom had one down at Reynolds Plant Lake, whatever it is, Lake Oconee, and they were called cottages.
Mhm.
And, but they were still 2,400 square feet. So they do come in all shapes and sizes, which is great.
Right, right. And I actually sent Shannon, I sent a link to Ross Chapin's website where he has several different types of houses ranging in different sizes and 1-story and 2-story, just so you can see some different examples of what he's developed. And again, if we're going to talk about affordable housing, Ross's houses have a lot of built-in details. Those can be really pared down depending on the user group.
Yeah. You guys have questions? I'm sorry, I'm just passionate about this subject, so I could talk forever.
I got here a little bit late. Excuse me, I was thinking of, hi, my daughter from gymnastics. What's like the minimum acreage that would be required in order to develop? I mean, I guess there's a range, but what would be like the minimum acreage we'd need to?
Yeah, and you know, I don't know that, and I couldn't find it in the book, but it's not as much as like a single family house on a half an acre or an acre.
Yeah,
It
there's
uses
some stuff
far
in the
less
book.
land.
Yeah, Chris was right. I went and looked at the same thing. There's only a few like breadcrumbs in the book, and it would say like 8 houses in an acre in some cases. And I was trying to figure that out. My spatialness is not great, but again, we're only talking that a home might be 1,000 square feet.
Right.
So,
Well, 8 houses per acre would be a 5,000 square foot parcel, but you got to take out all your amenities and everything. So that would be doable. Again, of course, the focus is, I guess for mine, is affordable housing. So the cost and size are very, very important. And Chris, by the way, if you want to look at another example, go look at Barnsley Gardens, which is outside of Dalton, Georgia. It's kind of up in that area.
Okay.
Now, it's more of a resort type place, but it's another example of this. It's called Barnsley Gardens, and it's really, really nice. But
Okay.
anyway, you know, you mentioned about the one there with the homeless and the little cottages and all that kind of also reminded me of the Dream Center over in Easley. So, I mean, I like the concept, but I guess this is the affordable housing piece of me, which is what I'm mostly focused on. Everybody on this committee knows that, is that we'd struggle to keep the houses in the price range we'd need to. I worry that. And I guess the other thing, if the city owns the land per se, how do we do? I mean, do we lease the house? Maybe that's what maybe we have to do. Maybe we lease the houses. They buy the house, but it's on leased land.
okay, so there are a couple of answers to that, and I've got that together. But basically, that one of the concepts is, and Todd, this isn't for a new zoning ordinance right now, but one of the discussions is to give the builder the land, and with all the conditions, not just give it to them, but yeah, that they would sell the land, because then we work out what that balance is going to be. So one of the concepts, and again, this is just for our consumption today, please, is that what we could do is host a competition of sorts and put the zoning ordinances, just give it to the builders and say, you know, this is the challenge. It's sort of like what we just were doing with the charrette stuff, John, is, you know, throw everything out the window and what can you create? And see what people come up with, because right now people are bound by all the ordinances in the book, and that's not going to work for this particular.
Right. I was going to bring that up too. To do something like this really requires a change in zoning, so it is allowed. And have you looked at any zoning that kind of is a model after this? Because it does mention some zoning in the book.
It does. And I was curious about that. I've got a list of calls I've got to make, because there was one of these groups, I think you mentioned it, out in Washington, that I wanted to talk to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found a reference to let's see, it's in the city of Kirkland, Washington, and they have what's called an innovative housing demonstration ordinance, which I'm sure you could get a copy of,
Oh, yeah.
which allows this kind of thing to happen. And I was looking kind of quickly on Ross Chapman's website, and I thought I had seen something about zoning previously, but I couldn't find it again. But I'm sure they have probably helped rewrite some zoning that would allow pocket parks. Because right now, you're going to have a minimum lot size for a single family house, and those sort of restrictions are going to tie your hands up.
Exactly. We don't want that to happen.
I don't know, is Todd Stedman here today?
Elaine, we can't
Andy?
hear you.
Pardon me?
Elaine?
Sorry, Elaine was trying to chime in, but she was muted.
Go ahead, Elaine.
Can't hear you.
Okay, try again. I've unmuted you. But yeah, I like the idea of an innovative zone, and that's what it would take. I mean, I could envision, 3 different types of these, of one for young families, one for seniors, and figure out how that would work. Elaine, are you good? No. Okay, Todd, go ahead.
Christine just asked if I was on the call.
Oh, okay. I'm glad you're there. Have you looked at any, you probably haven't since it just came up, but are you familiar with any sort of pocket park zoning?
Yeah, I mean, there are really probably 2 or 3 ways to go about this. I was talking to some members of council earlier today that one option is we've drafted what is called a flexible review district ordinance, and that it allows a lot of flexibility to kind of do something like this. The first time you do it, of course, there'll be, a lot of logistics and standards to establish, and it would be on a case-by-case basis. That's one option, highly flexible. Another option would be, our patio home development already allows this, and that, Catherine's saying no, but anyway, the patio home development allows up to 10 per acre. So you get the density, but you can also amend the conditions to require additional open space and other standards that you may want to include. And our land development regulations require already a percentage of open space, canopy coverage, sidewalks, all these other standards that are required. Anyway, apparently Catherine doesn't agree with any of those things, so I'll let her speak.
Well, all I'm saying is that I think this is a case when we have an opportunity to do something innovative, let's make it innovative and not just place it in the book that's been there. That's all I'm saying is let's see what the innovation brings, because so far that patio home thing has not created innovation. And so that's all I'm saying is let's do something that is truly innovative. And for that, that's not our job. It's not your job. It's not my job. That's what a builder could do for us.
Well, and that's why the first ordinance that I mentioned, the flexible review district, would accomplish that, because it creates, in a similar manner to a planned development, a tremendous amount of latitude for the city to work with a developer and express what they're hoping to get out of such a deal, and for the developer then to work with the city to come up with a plan that everybody feels good about. Again, tremendous amount of latitude. That draft ordinance is floating out there, and it would allow to do exactly what I'm looking at here and exactly what I've heard Christine talk about. The reason I mentioned patio homes is that Developers are frequently nervous about entering into an arrangement without a determined outcome.
Well, but that's what we don't want to start. That's the discussion that we are not going to have here today. But again, you're right. People are going to see that as putting them in a box, and they're going to come up with the same box response by the same corporate builders that we see. And let's see what else is out there from these innovative people to create something.
Yeah, and this, we should probably all put our thinking caps on, because this might be a good model project between some investors in conjunction with the city. And I think if we do one, then it'll be a shining example for others to follow.
Yes.
Can I share an idea? Because real quick. So Catherine, you're talking about the builder being the owner of the property. And I was just wondering, and this goes back to June, the last time I was able to attend a meeting, if it would be possible to maintain land ownership with the current property owners, and somehow maybe have a shared stake with the city and maybe with a builder, but that the current property owner doesn't just sell in a one-time deal, but either through some sort of royalty structure or some sort of, shares structure. And I'll be honest, everything I know about economics, I learned from Shark Tank. So that, if this sounds like some sort of Mr. Wonderful deal, it is. But I think that the community and some of the communities where we'd like to see this affordable housing developed, they may be skeptical or of just selling out to a builder. There may be some mistrust there. And in the same way, on the flip side, like you guys are saying, the builder may not want to be put in some sort of one-dimensional situation. So, I mean, it's going to take a perfect storm, but I was just curious, just in terms of financing and, would it be possible to, for somebody to sell the land or even lease the land to the city with some investors, like Christina's saying, and then the property owner, gets the lion's share of the revenue. And I guess I'm thinking if these are long-term rental properties, right? Not that we're going to.
No, these would be owned. These are not rentals.
Okay. So we're looking for individual families to be able to purchase these.
Yes.
So is all our affordable housing focused on individual families purchasing these properties, or is there any rental in the plan?
John's probably the better person to answer that.
It just seems like we may want to have a mix. I mean, there's different schools of thought right now in terms of whether people are even interested in signing a mortgage or.
I don't disagree with you. And one of the things I kept thinking of, especially as we've all batted around the idea here about getting the university on board in some way, is to reserve some of these spaces for visiting faculty.
Mm-hmm.
To reserve some spaces for, a couple other things. So I don't disagree with you. And to answer your question without sounding like a smartass, it is that I guess all things are on the table.
Right.
I know early when this
throw that
process-
idea out there about, because I was in Abel in June, and there were a lot more, and Lisa, you can speak to this too probably, but there were a lot more vacant properties than I anticipated. I mean, there's land that, it's looks like a couple lots even together. And then over behind Presley's and the mosque, I mean, there's a large property for sale right now that I just happened to see a real estate sign there driving through there the other day. So, in some of these neighborhoods where we'd love to maintain the integrity of the neighborhood, and allow people who currently own property there to continue to own property, but also develop, that's part of the neighborhood development aspect of what we're doing, I guess, but tied in with affordable housing. I would just love to see the current folks, have some sort of leverage in how the property ends up being used, whether they maintain ownership or ensure that it goes to the kind of families that they'd like to see in their neighborhood.
That is a challenge. You can't pick who buys your house. That's
right.
illegal. But I understand what you're saying, and we've batted, I know I've heard John bat that around about the Shaw Center. Lillian?
Yeah, I was just going to interject because he mentioned, maybe people don't want to buy. We had at some point discussed, and I think it kind of got pushed to the wayside, looking at bigger issues, but something with the rental language and rental code or ordinance. I don't know what applies there, but we have so many rented by the bedroom. So maybe even putting less by the bedroom things and more by the home or by the apartment as a whole, sort of a thing. So I think we should, like Sam said, that should be revisited at some point, whether it's now or later. I think it would be valuable.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, we don't want, and the point is, as Todd was saying about some of this planned development, is that's where you can put in the deed restrictions and some other conditions. So about selling, about renting, all those other things. So this would be, Chris, I'm probably going to use a word that's maybe not in the book. I don't mean to misinterpret any of this, but there are conditions about living in these neighborhoods. I mean, and hopefully I think a lot of this is where they're built so that those conditions are pretty clear to the people looking at them. It's like looking through Patrick Square here. You do have to understand that somebody's going to be 10 feet away from you.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I think it goes back to, again, who are your users? For affordable housing, they may all be renters. And you may have a different group that's first-time home buyers. So, if they're renters, then all this common property or the green would be covered in their rent, and it's common for everybody to use it. If they're first-time home buyers, then they would probably have an HOA for the grounds. And again, it's small because it's a small community, but I think you have to, remember who your users are. And I don't really see, there's so much student housing now that is rented by the bedroom. I don't really see that happening here because I don't think there's a need for it right now. There's so much student housing, but there is a need for affordable housing and first-time home buyers, and a need for rejuvenating some of these neighborhoods that have just started to die off and don't want to lose their integrity. So again, I think you have to constantly remind yourself, who are the users here?
Something that I thought of when you showed that aerial plan that Christine, that you had drawn, it made me think of Patrick Square, just on a more real, I don't want to say realistic, but a smaller budget scale kind of a thing, because my mom and I have sat around before and we're like, man, how great would it be if my grandmother could live in the apartments that are there for the older people. I live in a townhome and she has a house. We'd be close walking distance. So this image that's on the screen would appeal to people like us who are normal income,
Right.
home seeker, so that I don't think you'd have a problem filling them in Clemson by any means. I think it would be very realistic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I love this idea. I mean, I'm just saying, I'm not sure I could deal with only 1,000 square feet, but I do love the idea. And I think that's why I'm all about the innovation here too, because there are so many possibilities of what could be done. But yeah, one of the spaces, if you're asking about where some of the acreage is, I didn't know we owned land either, by the way. But one of the spaces that Andy mentioned is over toward me, actually closer on Old Pendleton Road, off of Old Pendleton Road. And I don't know the acreage. We're not talking huge, but again, we're talking about small neighborhoods. So I can find that out as we get to kind of the next step. But yeah, so right now, Sam, to answer your question, we're not really talking about kind of taking over anything. And that was in talking to Trail, and Trail would not compete for this, so I'm not violating any ethics. I've known Neil Workman since I was 5, so he would not compete for this. But that was it. It was, well, part of the idea was in giving that's right now, as John knows and reminds me of, the cost per acre in Clemson is huge. So the fact that the city would have this investment to use is important important, and I think is probably, as John might agree, our one shot at really creating something affordable. And then, yeah, Sam, I love your idea then of going into some other places where maybe we would have to buy the land, or we might have to do something more unique.
Chris, it sounds like it's pretty important to decide before we get to any sort of design phase, what type of person we're targeting, and kind of the structure of maybe rent versus own, but really that the type of person we're targeting would also inform the design of the houses that we're looking for and the design of the community center. So to me, it sounds like that's really an important, if not the first beginning step.
Yeah, I would say, who is your greatest need right now? What group?
Young
Yeah,
families.
People like me, yeah. People like Sam,
would like
people
to
like
know
me,
that
small
too.
families.
Okay, so you could probably start with, a 2.5 bedroom house with a loft upstairs that could possibly be a 3rd bedroom. Yeah, I think it could be relatively small. And in that case, it would be a house for sale with an HOA. But I think, I think an interesting, fun next step would be to get with Todd and Andy and see what the city has and see what the contingencies are on that parcel and see how big it is. And, you can do a quick, I can hook you up with architects. I am kind of semi-retired, but I know people who do this kind of work, and they'd be happy to do some quick sketches for you to kind of see, okay, do we need an acre or do we need an acre and a half? How can we make all this work with the green and the parking and a 1,200 square foot footprint? Because if you can identify that first user group, then you're on your way.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Rosa, you have your hand up?
Yes, I heard someone, I can't identify who they were, speaking in reference to the Abel area and the land that seemed to be vacant. And then you were talking about, I forgot the other place, location, the possibilities of, the houses or the pocket housing. I would like to know if it's in the Abel area, would it be for whomever come first? Because as you stated, it's a historical area and we want to build it up. So as we all know, anyone that's been in the area, there are things that need to be built up, that the Shaw Center is trying to and will work on. So would the target artist be anyone, or will it be first to come within the neighborhoods to seek out who is in need to try to get this affordable housing?
I'm not putting you off. I'm just thinking that might be a few questions down the road, because Abel, that plat would not be our first option, Rosa. I agree with you on those challenges, and I don't know the answer. That would be something we would work with the community on.
Well, that's a good question for Tom, because South Carolina has defined areas that are underserved and there's money available. And I'm not sure those kind of lines change all the time, but that may be an area that is underserved. I don't know, is Tom on this call?
No, Tom is tied up today.
Okay. But that's a very good question. And I think as far as, and this is a question for Andy and Todd, can you define within the city an area specifically that is historic for that user group? I don't know the answer to that question.
And Rosa, I'm Sam. I mentioned Abel, and in my mind, yeah, it would be developed so that neighbors could talk about who might be interested in renting or owning new property or new development there in Abel. But as Catherine said, there may be, and as others are saying now, there may be limitations as to how exclusive, or if we can give people from Abel, first dibs on renting or buying there. But I would imagine it more as like a word of mouth kind of thing. And again, I'm only speaking, I know nothing about anything, but you know, if whoever owns the property there can develop interest and excitement among neighbors in the neighborhood, then I think it could happen kind of naturally where, you know, if neighbors are aware of opportunities to rent or buy there, then they could kind of be first in line. Just having their kind of ear to the ground to know what's going on. And then like Christine's saying, if there's other mechanisms, but, and as you say, Rosa, because of the historic nature of the neighborhood, then that could give even more leverage for, you know, current ABEL neighbors to have priority. But I don't know.
And I guess my question for Rosa is what is the population like right now in ABEL? Is it mostly older people or younger families? What do you see as the greatest need for housing right now?
It's a mix of, mixed flux of people. It depends on what side you're on. Because ABEL is like over there where the church. Then when you come over to Hawthorne, that's considered as ABEL as well. But we call it Hawthorne for whatever reasons, in Cadillac Heights, which reports have been done on. But all of it is ABEL.
Okay, so it's mixed.
So it's a fluctuation between the few, yeah.
But I think in fairness, the majority of the people that live in those communities are older. And getting back to the Sam and the land, I think some of the problems we're going to run into with the land, the vacant properties, but even in some cases, the homes that are rental, is that the property is owned by out of town, out of state families or people. There's also some portions of the property that are owned by numerous heirs. And so, getting them to come to agreement to do something is also going to be somewhat difficult. I think you'll find a lot of the vacant land is actually that type of property where it's owned by families that are not in the area. And quite frankly, there are several generations of heirs involved in that. So that makes it a little bit more difficult. I do think, though, that the properties within those neighborhoods, the desire would be for the homeowners that would come back into those neighborhoods could be people that currently live in the community or rent in the community, would want to buy in the community, or it might be relatives that do that. I still believe that right now, if we build what I call affordable housing, new affordable housing, unless it's in those neighborhoods. So for example, this property off of Pendleton Road, wherever it is, that's not going to be people that currently live in Clemson. Now they may work in Clemson, but they don't live in Clemson. And I struggle to see us being able to do what you've got here laid on this screen here, but anything like that, where those houses are going to be cheaper than $150,000 each. And that's not an affordable house. Now that is that's a first time buyer home, or it could be what I call a workforce home, but I just don't, that's not what I deem as an affordable home.
Right. I agree. Using conventional construction methods, there is a type of construction that can cut down on costs called panelized construction, where it's literally the house is made in a factory and then shipped, and it's just assembled on site, and that generally costs less.
But Christine, even Ryan Homes over in Pendleton, there's a project, if you haven't seen it, it's over there by the elementary school. And they're doing exactly that, what you just described, but those homes are still pushing $200,000. Now they're bigger, but they're not.
Yeah, they're bigger. Yeah. And that's where, you've got to look at it in terms of, particularly now with lumber, it's gone up, it's come back down in price, but you've got to look at typical construction methods and can you do something outside of the box, and what are your land costs? And at least with this kind of community, conceptually those land costs should come down because of the density, and perhaps if Clemson has land that they just own right now that could be used. So there are all sorts of variables in this. And again, the underserved areas, if there's available money for a project like this, that would help with those costs. You know, and it could be that we start, or you guys start to look at where these underserved areas are. And is, you know, because that's where you're going to be able to get some money, hopefully. And maybe that's where you start.
Lisa, did you have any, going along with talking about the underserved areas and possibly ABEL, did you have any perspective that you wanted to, or insights you would be willing to share about ABEL?
Absolutely. Thanks, Sam. Well, a lot of the issues that we're seeing here in ABEL, and it is mixed. We have an older population, and then we have young families as well. Some of the vacant properties that you mentioned, Sam, one of them in particular where a mobile home was recently torn down. The man who owns the land wants to be able to put another mobile home back on the property, but it's a zoning issue, and it's a matter of what the property owner is able to afford to put back onto that property. So we have a lot of issues like that as well in the traditional Black communities. Here in Clemson, we see it a lot. Like John was saying, property will get passed down from generation to generation, and then all of a sudden whoever owns the property or whoever was living in it leaves, it becomes dilapidated, and then no one can afford to fix it up, move back in it. And then when the city tells them that they have to demolish it, they don't have the finances to be able to build anything else on that property. So those are also instances where you'll see vacant land.
Yeah, so that's,
I
I was hoping for that reason we could have some sort of creative partnership between the landowner, the city, and I guess possibly builders in order to ultimately benefit the renter or the new owner, but also to set it up to where the current property owner, you know, it's not just a one-time sale deal. It can be almost like another investment for them, where they lease or sell to the city pays them back, but the city's going to develop the land, I guess, in conjunction with the builder, of course. And then, you know, I don't know what the long-term deal would be if eventually the property owner would just reap a % royalty, but it just seems like there's some potential. I mean, especially John, if you're saying, and Lisa agrees, there's some out-of-state owners, and then there's some families that may have multiple individuals that have a stake in the property. It just seems there's some potential for development, but it sounds like Lisa, and I think John, you would agree that some people are just kind of stuck. And so they're just kind of sitting on the land, whether it's developed, partially developed, or kind of a mess right now. And
well, I think a mess is the best way to say it. I mean, I could take you to a couple of properties over and go in Red Hill right now, where one house needs to be repaired or work done on it. And quite frankly, the gentleman doesn't have the means to do it. And he's only a partial owner of the property. And then there's another one there where the people died, just like Lisa was talking about, and the house is just sitting vacant right now. So, I mean, there's other examples of that around. So it's pretty common, quite honestly. I mean, the thing to do would be to try to, and that's what we're trying to do at the Shaw Center in some of those situations, is bring those houses back up to a more livable standard and then kind of move on down the road. And that's probably, when you look at the overall spend, you can do more with less that way than this. I like this pocket concept. I'd like to see it done. But I think it's probably not for my target audience. It could be for other target audiences, but it's not for mine.
so, yeah, and I'm just learning more and more about the Shaw Center, but the current model of the Shaw Center to help rehabilitate existing homes is much more practical and affordable and better return on investment in the long run, in your opinion?
Right, right now the dollar spent. I mean, I got 11 homes right now that need to be fixed. And, you know, so if I had somebody, if Todd were to give me $100,000, we'd go to work on those homes and probably bring most of them back up to where they need to be, a more livable condition. And then, you know, they're going to be, once you fix those, there'll be more to be fixed. And that's kind of where it is. But I don't want to stagnate this or things like this. I think we need to do this as well.
But none of those 11 places, John, none of those 11 properties, there's not enough acreage to where you could just raise the home and then.
But the point of that, you know, you can do that all day long, but if you raise the home and that a homeowner has got to have a place to live. Well, he right now may be paying $200, $300 a month. You raise the home up and back. Now he's going to be paying $500, $600, $700 a month, which he can't pay. That's the problem. That's the problem.
But that's what I'm talking about. Some sort of creative arrangement where he starts to lease or sell that property. So he's essentially selling that acre of property to the city, and he's immediately, you know, receiving rent from the city or compensation for that property from the city until, you know, he recuperates its full value. And then after he recuperates its full value, he continues to receive a royalty or percentage stake in what the property earns thereafter.
But you're assuming that it's individually owned.
Right.
Yes, and that the property owner is going to want to sell it or lease it to the city. In a lot of cases, that won't be the same. That won't happen.
Right. It sounds good, but I mean, you know, a couple of them I'm thinking about right now, there are 3 or 4 different areas involved, and, you know, the person is sitting on the property. If we gave him X amount of money, then he's going to have to divide it 4 or 5 different ways. And so it gets diluted to the point it's of no value to him. So that's the big
right. Is it possible to take a look at any existing properties, whether they're on your list of 11 or others in the area where there may be a single property owner, and we could, I mean, not necessarily now, but down the road, approach them about developing their property? Well,
I'm going to answer it this way, and I think Rosa she'll amplify this a lot, is that we're in the process of building trust. And so the fact that we've now got 11 homeowners that need some help, I mean, they've raised their hands, so obviously their level of trust is greater than the others.
Right.
And there are others that need some survey work, so you can add that to the group. So it's roughly 15. So until we reach that level, that saturation level of trust, where you could then begin to have these kind of conversations. I mean, that's the long haul. I mean, that's years out. I mean, I say years, but it's probably 3 to 5 years out before you get to the point where you can start knocking on doors and having those kind of conversations, I feel.
I hear you. Yeah. And I certainly would not want to step on Shaw Center's toes. I mean, I think
this isn't about the Shaw Center. This is not about it at all. This is just about trust. This is just about a level of trust in that community. It doesn't matter whether it's me, you, the Shaw Center, or whomever.
Right. Okay?
We're outsiders coming in.
Okay.
Right.
But one of the things, Sam, that you and John both alluded to, because I have to go, John and
I do too.
So I'm going to do this is, I think what we hit on is some of the stratification that we need. And to get to Chris's point then about where we would start, we need to kind of think through that. So I'm going to ask Andy to order each of you one of these pocket neighborhood books, and I'll either deliver it or we'll figure that out. I'll reach out to you guys. And we can order you the books. And then I will also, Sam, you have a good point. And I think John mentioned at some point we'll schedule a discussion with Todd and with Andy to talk about kind of how this would work and to brainstorm on a lot of different sides of this. There's not just one way to do this. And then let's think through, you know, if we think about, we're going to kind of eliminate students from this discussion, at least the undergraduate students. But let's think about the rest of Clemson and kind of what the challenges are. So I will work that through, and then maybe next week we can kind of think through a SWOT analysis and kind of go from there. Does that work for everybody?
We talked about you guys having 3 projects going forward. Do you want to continue to meet as one big team on Mondays and then meet in smaller groups? Or do you want to continue to meet for a little bit longer as this one big team and then break up into your smaller groups?
I think eventually splitting up might be good, because there's a lot of information if one person's only passionate about one of those projects, you know.
Right. So I guess what I'm asking, do you guys want to meet next Monday, or do you want me to try kind of split you out the way you indicated your interest the last couple weeks, and I'll reach out to everybody and we can schedule some smaller meetings that can be more in depth.
How about that?
Okay.
Yeah.
I will do that. So I'll be reaching out to everybody and we'll try to find meeting times that work for the smaller groups.
Okay, guys.
Thank you.
Shannon's in charge. I've got to run. If you need anything, let her or I know. Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much, Christine. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
I always learn things. I always learn things.
Yeah, let me know if I can help you in the future.
Don't worry. We will have your number.
Great. Thank you.
All right. So is everybody okay with us wrapping up, or do you guys have any questions or any other thoughts about pocket neighborhoods?
Elaine, do you have a question, or are you forever muted?
It's interesting. I'm really interested in this. Do you know, since you all know that there are homes or pocket neighborhoods already built, what is the going price to purchase a home?
I am not, I have not looked into this at that level. I will do that and get back to you guys. I think it really depends on, again, they are all different sizes. They are for all different populations, and places use very unique development and funding strategies. I think that play into how much those, what the lease rates and how much those houses cost to own. But I will look into that, Rosa, and get back to you.
All right, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Are you guys good with wrapping up today? All right. Thank you all for being here. If anything else comes up, let me know. And we'll figure out a new kind of meeting configuration going forward.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank y'all. Thank you, Chris.
All right, you're welcome. Take care.